welcome back to yet another episode of the Cryptoviser. Today we're talking about the money printing has begun. Now we've seen kind of the opposite of money printing over the last few years. We saw the 2020 pandemic time period. We saw a lot of money printing going into the markets, right? And then 2021 is when that money started flowing and the prices started, or I should say, the demand went up and the supply was kind of the same. And then we saw those inflation numbers actually hitting in 2022, but the inflation was actually taking place in 2021. Well, after that, we saw the reverse repo operations from the Federal Reserve. So there's repo operations and then there's reverse repo operations at the Federal Reserve. And this is a money injection into the ecosystem and the economy or removal. It's kind of in the overnight lending markets for the banks, but essentially the Federal Reserve is fronting that money. And we're going to be getting to that in a little bit because we also saw a big reduction this past week in the dollar index. This is the relative strength of the dollar compared to other currencies around the world. And you can see here on the 1 year chart, we are still much higher than where we were last year in terms of the strength of the dollar being much more. 100 would kind of be at par. And it doesn't necessarily mean like your dollar is worth 106.70. It's just a comparable measure compared relative to other currencies. And what we saw in the last month or so is a huge reduction in this number. And this could be very bullish and also indicate that the money printing is beginning, right? Because when money printing occurs, that's more money being pumped into the economy. And therefore, every other dollar out there loses value by fractions of fractions of a fraction of a percent. So anyway, we're going to be getting to that in a little bit, but I did want to kind of discuss some of the stuff that's going on in the cryptocurrency space and also what is happening with the Bitcoin mining company stocks. As this channel, we've talked extensively about many of these different Bitcoin mining companies, and let's kind of jump right into that. And then we're going to get into the money printing and show you the actual evidence from these repo operations that they are actually occurring. And don't forget to give the video a free thumbs up and also hit the subscribe button. That way you never miss a new video. By the way, I'm still kind of listening to you guys. How often do you want videos? Probably not every day, but maybe every other day, a few times a week, once a week. Let me know down below in the comments. So if we go to bitcointreasuries.org, you can see all of the publicly traded companies and also countries that own Bitcoin. And you can kind of see here, MicroStrategy obviously is at the top when I'm recording this at the beginning of 2025, just under 500,000 Bitcoin. I think that they're going to keep buying. What their goal is, I don't know. Probably 500,000. I can't really see them going over 1 million Bitcoin because that could also get to the point where if one entity holds that much, isn't an existential threat to the entire ecosystem, especially when they're buying it on debt. But anyway, that's for a whole different video. Let's kind of really zero in here on Marathon Digital and Riot Platforms because these are the two next largest Bitcoin companies that own Bitcoin that are also publicly traded on the stock market. Now, Marathon Digital, I'm going to start here. They have 40,000 Bitcoin. They have 50 exahashes per second. They're the most powerful Bitcoin mining company in the United States and potentially even in the world. And so there's been a lot, and there probably will continue to be a lot of focus on the Marathon Digital stock and ecosystem. Now, keep in mind, Marathon Digital, while it is the largest, it's only at just under $6 billion market cap. So there obviously is room to grow. But as we're talking about some of these other Bitcoin mining companies, keep in mind that it's worth about $6 billion. So that when we look at the other Bitcoin mining companies' market caps, you can kind of understand where Marathon is, whether it's undervalued or the other ones are overvalued. And then you can see Riot Platforms. Now, before we talk about Riot, let's kind of talk about Bitfarms for a minute, because Bitfarms is one of the, if you followed my video yesterday or the day before, I don't remember when it was posted exactly, but if you watch that video, I told you guys that the Bitcoin mining companies are important and also something that you can kind of own Bitcoin proxy companies in a stock. But the thing to keep in mind is that while that may be true, if they're not pivoting to AI as well, that's a problem. Because keep in mind, the Bitcoin mining companies, because of what they are, they're just basically server warehouses. They can very quickly take some of that space, some of their energized, electricity, and then utilize that for AI, which utilizes basically the same kind of technology in in compute for AI. It's basically the same thing, right? It's server racks, very extensive electricity and connection to the internet, and you're good to go. So what we're seeing here is Bitfarms is pivoting to AI as well, and they have announced just a few weeks ago that they were in a strategic partner to develop their AI business as well. And so there's been a lot of conversation about Riot Platforms, because keep in mind, Riot Platforms, they own 20% of Bitfarms, and they tried to actually buy Bitfarms outright for $2.30 a share sometime, I think, in 2024. And Bitfarms rejected that offer. But I believe that Riot Platforms still owns 20% of the entire market cap of Bitfarms. And guess their buy price was around 2 to 2.30, $2 to $2.30. And they're only about $700 million in market cap. Keep in mind what you're seeing on the screen. This is Canadian dollars. So if you convert it, it's roughly around 700 million US dollars in market cap. This is literally at historic lows, right? Multi-year lows. We haven't seen these kind of low numbers since 2023, and before that, 2020. So this is potentially, opportunity. Now, keep in mind, Bitfarms did just sell some of their business, a Bitcoin mining site in, I think, Paraguay, to Hive Blockchain, which is another publicly traded company. Um, some people, I've seen their criticisms of this, saying that, well, Bitfarms shouldn't be offloading their mining capabilities when they're extremely, like, their stock price has not performed and they haven't really given any investors a return. But I disagree with this. While this argument I understand, I also don't agree with it, because Bitfarms and all of these Bitcoin mining companies, they want to focus on the US right now, because we've heard from this administration that they want all Bitcoin to be mined in the United States. They want that AI compute, and it's going to have to be in the US. So if they're offloading their facilities outside the US, this can be very, very good for the company. The other thing to keep in mind is that Bitfarms is purchasing, uh, or at least it's about to purchase, Stronghold Digital Mining, which is another publicly traded Bitcoin mining company. So right now, when I'm recording this, Bitfarms has about 15 exahashes per second. That's their hash rate. And this is an indicator of how much how much part of the entire Bitcoin mining network they have. Marathon, 50 exahashes per second. Bitfarms has 15. So Bitfarms is about 30% of where Marathon Digital is. But they're buying Stronghold Mining. From my understanding, Bitfarms has a meeting at the end of February where they're going to be talking about the vote, because I think that there's a shareholder vote right now to either go for Stronghold, or like allow Bitfarms to buy it, or don't. And I think that vote is under Stronghold shares, not Bitfarms. But anyway, Bitfarms is having a meeting at the end of February where they're going to be discussing this, and then probably laying out the plan for this to actually go through. Now, when or if it actually does go through, this is going to be Bitfarms adding 5 exahashes per second approximately, which is 1/3 of their current hash rate. They're going to be increasing it by 5 exahashes per second, which will bring them up to about 20 exahashes per second, which puts them in line with where Riot Platforms is and some of the other large Bitcoin mining companies. I didn't pull up all the hash rates on this video. If you guys want me to do a video on what hash rate is and where all the Bitcoin mining companies stand, obviously, let me know down below in the comments, and we'll discuss that. So, although Bitfarms is losing a Bitcoin mining facility in Paraguay to Hive by selling it, they're also acquiring a much larger company that is US based. And so this could be very, very good if the narrative kind of picks up on Bitcoin mining companies within the United States, or the ones that are expanding within the United States. And Riot Platforms still owns a large chunk of Bitfarms. And Riot is, I think, the second or third largest Bitcoin mining company in the United States. And so Riot Platforms just released this a few days ago. It says Riot Platforms announces changes to its board of directors and provides update on their formal evaluation of AI and high power computing. So again, Riot Platforms pivoting towards AI. Bitfarms pivoting towards AI. They're probably going to do both. And many other companies are looking at this as well. Now, Core Scientific, this is another one that we've extensively talked about on this channel. We talked about it, I think, since the market crashed, because basically what happened was Core Scientific went bankrupt, and then they were basically bailed out by large institutions, and they reissued their stock. Now, they reissued their stock, I believe, the beginning of 2024. Let me see. The beginning of 2024 is, yeah. And so this price, $3.80, from what I understand, I wasn't following it that close, but the new shares were provided at a 10-to-1. So if you had 10 shares of the old stock, you'll get 1 share of the new stock. And so just we're going to be doing the numbers in our head, right? So let's just say you had 100 shares of Core Scientific prior, okay? Now let's go back. We can't look at this under CORZ. You can look at CORZQ, I think. They may have just taken down CORZQ, but if you look at my older videos, you can see the actual price history of that. But essentially, it went to 5 cents, okay? So let's say you put in, let's just say $10,000, okay? And you paid 5 cents per share. So 10,000 divided by, that didn't happen. Okay, so 10,000 divided by 5 cents, and then you would have 200,000 shares. Now, in the new stock, you would be getting 10-to-1. So we have to divide this by 10. And so you would have now 20,000 shares of the new stock. Remember, $10,000 you put in. Now, currently, the price of it is $12.35. So we multiply this by $12.38. So you would have $247,000 currently, approximately, if the math that I'm doing is correct, which it may not be accurate. I'm just doing rough estimates and guesses. That is huge, right? That's a 24x from the low of 5 cents during the bankruptcy. And I think it was 10-to-1 how they issued the new shares. I didn't follow it that closely, but this was a huge stock. Now, again, how many people actually bought it 5 cents, stayed through the bankruptcy, and then held till now? Probably not, almost no people. So keep that in mind as well. And is it going to go higher than it is now? Who knows? Probably. The market cap right now is only 3.46 billion, and they have a very high hash rate as well. And that brings us to BitDeer. Now, BitDeer is a little bit different, right? BitDeer is not a US-based company, so that's number one. Number two, Tether owns a large portion of it. But BitDeer, performance-wise, has done excellent this year, and they have also a fairly large hash rate. I think it's around 10 exahash per second, maybe 20 exahash per second. And so if you look at the 1-year chart, you can see that along with the rest of the market, in November, we went from a $7 low all the way up to a $26 high. So that's about almost a 4x, right? 3.5x. I mean, if you had it from September, from $6 all the way up to $25, it's a 5x. So big numbers from the Bitcoin mining companies. Now, a lot of people are talking about how, I mean, if you go to the people on social media who talk about like these Bitcoin mining companies, I mean, it's pretty bearish. People are holding very heavy bags, and they have probably a lot of leverage in the options and futures markets for it. But here's the deal. These companies are going to go much, much higher, number one, if they are pivoting to AI, and if they have a good performing company in terms of how much Bitcoin they're actually mining per quarter or per year. I mean, let's just look at Core Scientific, right? Went through bankruptcy. We had that 24x from the low in bankruptcy to where we are to currently. And just in January 2025, they mined 256 Bitcoin. Last month, 291 Bitcoin. So if you do the math on that, 256 Bitcoin times approximately $100,000, they're making about $25.5 million a month. And how much of that is their, like, you have to look at their cost to mine that. You know, if it's $20,000, they're making $80,000 every single Bitcoin they make, right? So you have to kind of understand that a little bit further as well. They this is Core Scientific. Yeah, Core Scientific has 20 exahash per second approximately. So they're kind of in that range where Bitfarms is going to be. So if we look at Riot Platforms has about 20 exahash, maybe 30 exahash, but they are 4.2 billion. Let's look at Bitfarms. Bitfarms 700 million, and Core Scientific is 3.46 billion. So they're all kind of like in a very tight range with each other, just a few $1 billion worth, right? I mean, to think that these companies are going to go to $20 billion, I think just on speculation alone, when the markets pump, I think it's extremely possible that we're going to see that. I mean, if you look at just last cycle, some of these Bitcoin mining companies, they outperformed pretty much everything. Let's look at Riot Platforms during the last cycle. And you can see during the last cycle in 2020, the stock was around $2, $1, and it went all the way up to $71. It's 100, about 70x from a dollar and 35x from $2. Big moves. But again, it didn't stay at those high prices for very long. It kind of stayed there, wavered, and then just dropped. So again, you have to kind of figure out where you're going to be selling, where you're going to be buying, because you don't want to be buying the top, selling the bottom. A lot of people, guys, this happens, right? So that's why I said in my previous video, if you've been watching, I think that this next pump, this is the pump to sell into, because the people who don't sell into it, there may not be another pump after that. Anyway, that brings us to the main part of this video, which is talking about what is happening in the markets, right? Because at the end of the day, what the Federal Reserve does from the standpoint of either funding credit or, like think about the housing market, right? I keep seeing videos from people who are real estate agents around the country and they're like, oh yeah, business is great. I'm like, who's buying, right? Because somebody who sells their home that they've locked in a few years ago, number one, they're underwater in terms of the price of their house, and number two, the interest rates are much higher. So if they go get another house, their mortgage payment may be higher than it is today. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at the repo operations, the reverse repo operations, how this ties in with what the Federal Reserve is doing. Because guys, when they start printing money, and I believe that they will, or at least make it easier, right? The housing market, like we just discussed, there's a lot of issues with the mortgage rates actually going higher, and the price is not really coming down at all, right? And from what I hear, the same thing's happening in the car market and many other markets as well. And so remember, March is when they're going to be talking about the budget, and if they pass a budget, what does that mean? More money is going to be printed. So anyway, let's look at the repo operations. So repo operations were occurring before the 2020 situation. In 2019, we started to see a little spike in the the repo operations. This is when I started to learn about what the repo operations were. And there was this huge spike right here in the interest rates. And that's when the Federal Reserve stepped in and they're like, oh, we're going to do an emergency repo operations. It's just going to be a few $1 billion over the course of a few weeks. Well, that turned into like $100 billion a day, $50 billion a day, $30 billion a day, $70 billion a day, all the way through when the pandemic situation occurred, where they were putting $184 billion a day into the repo operations. And this kind of the repo markets are, again, overnight lending markets for the banks. And so that showed that there was kind of an issue there. And when they stopped or slowed down in the middle of 2020, what we ended up seeing was the reverse repo operations, which is kind of the opposite, started to pick up. You can see that in 2021, there was really no reverse repo operations at all. And then it started to pick up, and you started to see $369 billion in repo operations a day, 400, 500, $600 billion a day, all the way over $1 trillion a day at the end of 2022, when really we had a lot of collapses and credit situations, because remember, the FTX collapse was over leverage. Over leverage is basically taking out too much debt, and then everything just collapses on top of it. And it wasn't just FTX, it was a lot of other companies. So that's something to keep in mind. And so now what we're seeing is the reverse repo operations have kind of slowed to almost nothing. But what we're seeing now, if we scroll all the way to where we are now, is we're starting to see little spikes here and there of repo operations taking place. Now, what does this all mean, right? Well, from somebody like me or you who are just kind of following the markets, trying to figure out what to do, it's just kind of an indicator that we're starting to see little spikes. Little spikes to me mean we're going to start seeing more smaller spikes to avoid these large spikes. And that's what we're seeing as well. And if we scroll just to like, let's just pull the last 3 months, you can see that they're already starting to print a lot more, right? That looks like $100 million a day, $100 million a day. But before you know it, maybe that's going to turn into 200 million a day, 300 million a day, 400 million a day. And essentially, you really have to look at the M2 money supply as well. It's somewhere here. They move things on this US debt clock quite often, but I do believe that the M2 money supply, oh, right here, when you start to see the M2 money supply spiking by hundreds of billions in a day, it's also another indicator, right? But really, we got to also take that into account, the 10-year yield, and understand what's happening with the 10-year yield. If we just look at the year-to-date 10-year yield, started at about 4.6, went up to 4.8, went all the way down to 4.4. So it's in this kind of low to mid 4% range. And compared to some of the other yields, right? If we pull this back to a year, we saw the bottom was 362, 3.62%. And what happened in September, a lot of the market, at least crypto, was low. When the dollar was high in January, most crypto was higher than where it was in September. So as the yield increases, if you just look at that individually, as the yield increases, so does crypto. But let's look at the dollar on the other hand. Pull this up year to date, you can see that the dollar started the year at 108, and now the dollar's at 106. So some would say, again, if you're just looking at, well, let's pull it back a little bit further. September, the dollar was at the low, and in January, the dollar was significantly higher than it was. Same thing with Bitcoin. Now, in this short period of time, it may not be correlated, right? If we just look at the year to date, maybe it is. But if we just look at the last month, I mean, this is a significant drop from 109 down to 106. And that's a 2.46% drop in a month in the dollar index and the relative strength of the dollar. Now, you may say, well, that's a very small percentage, which it is, right? But tiny little moves in the Dixie can make major moves in other markets. So this is something to keep in mind. What this means for everything that's going on in the market, I mean, that's really for you to decide. You have to decide, like, when do I invest? Do I invest when the dollar's going down, or when the dollar's going up, or when the dollar's staying the same? Remember, it's just relative strength of the dollar. So the relative strength of the dollar can stay exactly the same, but if other areas of the market, like more money gets printed, more the interest rate goes down, which now the administration is saying the Federal Reserve needs to lower interest rates. Well, if they do all of that and more money floods into the economy, this could be very positive for the crypto space. Is it going to do anything to the price? I don't know. As we discussed on previous videos, right? Wall Street is in control of the markets now. They have so much crypto and so many ETFs involved. Like, everybody's getting all excited about, oh, they just put in a Solana ETF. They just put in an XRP ETF. They put in a Dogecoin ETF. And everyone's excited about these things. But as we've seen, Wall Street, all they have to do is dump $100 million onto the market in a day, which they have done. I think in January, all the ETFs together in one day dumped like $500 million of the crypto. And that means that the ETF issuer is selling the coins underlying. And so if they sell the coins underlying, where are these coins getting sold to? Well, if MicroStrategy is buying, maybe MicroStrategy is buying all that up. But they are in control of the market. They can sell to offset buying, and they can buy to offset selling to keep the price somewhat stable. Or they can do neither and let the price go either very high or very low. That's why I think at some point we are going to enter a bear market, and I think it's going to be triggered by Wall Street, by the ETFs dumping on the market, because they're going to dump such high significant amounts that there's going to be nobody on the other end buying, because everybody's been buying for the last, however many months in the frenzy. including with Wall Street. And so this is why it is important to understand which companies already own the Bitcoin, because these companies, they don't have to buy as the price. The price right now of Bitcoin is about $100,000. Let's say it goes to 200,000, right? It doubles. There's going to be companies buying at that price. And these companies, they can hold or they can sell to leverage that extra money to expand their operations or expand their AI operations and grow their business, even through a bear market. Most of these Bitcoin mining companies did not do this during the last cycle. That's why we saw a lot of these Bitcoin mining companies going bankrupt because they didn't do that. And what they were doing in 2021 was they were buying machines for um, more mining. They were pre-ordering them in 2021, and they were going to be delivered in 2022, which was already the bear market. So when some of these companies were accepting these new machines, the cost to mine Bitcoin was much higher, or the return on that the Bitcoin that they're mining was lower because we were in a bear market. So they weren't getting as much Bitcoin, as much dollars for their Bitcoin as they were in the bull market. So a lot of them were getting delivered these machines that they couldn't even power up because it didn't make sense from an energy cost perspective to fire up the machines in a bear market, which means they not only lost the revenue from that, but they also lost the value of those machines because every year they release new machines that are more powerful and better than the old machines. So if you have a machine that was built in 2021 and they didn't get fired up until 2023, they're already old machines. I hope, and this is what I talked about during the last bear market, is I hope that we're going to see these Bitcoin mining companies preparing for the bear market. No, I mean, how did these Bitcoin mining companies, how they did not know that we were going to be in a bear market, and why were they pre-ordering Bitcoin mining machines to be delivered in the bear market? That didn't make sense. Now, I hope what we're seeing here, a lot of Bitcoin mining companies, Marathon Digital, Riot Platforms, CleanSpark, Hut 8 Mining, Block, they all have been buying Bitcoin. And I think that they're prepared. And I would imagine that the smart ones are going to sell large portions if they double or triple their investment in a very short period of time, and then take that money to deploy to expand their operations, not only into Bitcoin mining, but also into AI, because AI may be the thing that saves some of these companies from potential bankruptcy if they didn't have that other source of revenue. Because keep in mind, the the cost of the revenue from AI is probably going to be constant and up, where Bitcoin mining, it fluctuates based on where the price of Bitcoin is. And so that's a big difference from a a large corporation perspective of where they want to put their energy and their money. Obviously, no risk, no reward. So if they're just going to completely pivot to AI, they're not going to get the upside of the Bitcoin. But if they're not buying the Bitcoin in the bear market and then selling in the bull market to then go and expand their other operations to last them through the bear market, that way they can continue to grow through the bear market to be even more prepared for the next cycle. Well, I don't know. I don't know if they're those are the companies worth to own. But as we discussed, there's a lot of companies that are making that pivot that are extremely, in my view, undervalued, and many other people believe the same. And I mean, there's a potential for some of these companies to run up. I mean, think about it. If we just think about $20 billion, which is like, think about companies that literally pull up Uber. Uber just started making money, right? They're worth $167 billion. Okay. Riot Platforms is worth $4 billion, and Riot Platforms owns how much Bitcoin? $20,000, 20,000 Bitcoin, which is basically almost half of their entire market cap is just Bitcoin. So are they undervalued compared to other companies that I believe are overvalued? Yeah. And what's more likely to offset? Are you going to more likely see a correction on the undervaluation or in the overvaluation? Based on market history, it's usually the undervaluation. You're going to see a more violent upside than the downside. So it's going to be interesting to see. I want to know what you guys think about these Bitcoin mining companies. What do you think if this means with what we're seeing in the repo operations and the reverse repo operations, and how this is all going to play into the overall crypto markets? Let me know down below, and also let me know what you guys want to see in future videos. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you when I see you. Crypto on.